Important issue, I think, for the city of Canton. Great, thank you. And an issue that I care a lot about, that Tom cares a lot about. And I think in providing leadership to our committee, Tom has made it a very point, as he had on many issues, to make sure that the public is educated. So I think that Tom and I are going to kind of bring differing views on the charter issue. Ultimately, this may be something that City Council votes on next year, and it possibly, depending on how those votes shake out, could be something for you to vote on. And so it's very important for you to have an understanding of what this issue is, because it's something that fundamentally affects your city government. And so, to begin, I'm going to give a brief overview of what charter government is. A charter is a city's constitution. It provides the framework of how a municipality operates. So if you think in terms of the federal government, we have a United States Constitution. It doesn't try to solve every problem, but it lays out the framework which governs how that municipality interacts internally and interacts with the citizens. One important point of a charter, just like the United States federal Constitution, it does not try to solve every issue that may come up. It provides the tools that are there to allow the city to continue to grow and to adapt to its changing population. And as indicated here in this quote, it leaves a great deal of policy-making power to council and flexibility in meeting the needs of the municipality as they arise. And this is a quotation from an attorney named John Govt. You're going to hear me refer to him a lot. He's the foremost authority on charter government in the state of Ohio. So, Canton's obviously functioning. We're here, we're sitting here today in City Hall. There must be something in place that governs how the city of Canton deals with its constituents and deals with internally with itself. Canton is what we call a statutory city. It's very different than a charter. Canton's legal framework is defined entirely by the Ohio General Assembly in state statute in the city of Columbus. And statutory plans, unlike a charter, at least in the words of Attorney Gotherman, they're inflexible and they cannot be adjusted for the size of the city, nor may they be tailored due to the economic, political, or social needs of the community. They must be amended only by our state legislatures. So if we think of how that process comes about, if Canton wants to make an internal change, if we want to merge a department, or if we want to enact a measure to give citizens more say in how Canton conducts its business, we have to call our friends in Columbus, say, dear friends, would you mind amending the state statutes that govern the city of Canton? And when Columbus picks up that phone, they have to not only be willing to answer yes to Canton, but all of the other statutory cities. Because if they make a change to a statutory city rule or procedure, it applies to all of the statutory cities. It's much different than what a charter does. So what then are other cities? You have two types. Statutory cities, ruled by Columbus, charter cities that write their own rules. And in my description, you may not be surprised to learn that the vast majority of the cities in the state of Ohio have in fact adopted charters. And it's over 73% of all cities, and of the 10 largest cities in the state, 7 have adopted charters. So we talk about Cleveland, we talk about Columbus, we talk about Cincinnati. They all have charters. Canton's one of the few that does not. We're joined by Parma and Lorraine. So, what can you do with a charter? Sounds great, everybody has them. Must be something fantastic about them. Well, you can make changes in your government. And you can give your city government more flexibility and more control locally. They can be strengthened to strengthen the democratic process, and they can be made in such a way to make government more efficient than would be under the state statutes as they were written back in the 1900s. Probably the most important point is that we don't have to seek Columbus approval in order to make a change. And another point that's often overlooked here at the bottom, highlight that, in the words of Attorney Gotherman, when we talk about legal decisions, court decisions, I mean, I'm an attorney by trade, so that's obviously something that appeals to me. When judges are called upon to evaluate the conduct of a municipality, they're almost always more deferential to the city and the action that was taken by the city pursuant to its charter than in a statutory form. And that's an important point. So instead of talking in terms of abstract principles, what are some of the actual changes that you could have here in the city of Canton with the charter? Well, there can be serious changes, no doubt about it. You can get rid of the mayor entirely, replace him with a city manager that's completely appointed by council. The answer is to no. You could go the other direction. You could consolidate power in the mayor's office and have the mayor not seek council's approval for different appointments to boards, etc. You could combine certain departments. You could combine the treasurer's office. You can combine the auditor's office. Certain things that are statutorily defined, those can be blocked together. These are serious changes, obviously. But there can be subtle changes, efficient changes. These are changes that I care about. You can actually strengthen the democratic process, which is something that I know a lot of people that I serve on the Judiciary Committee care a lot about. In the words of Attorney Govt, councils of non-charter municipalities presently do not have the power to submit ordinances to a vote on their own initiative, except tax levies, bond issues, or other certain circumstances. The charter can make this happen. So what does that mean? And we've dealt with some pretty hot-button issues here at council. Traffic cameras is one that I think comes to mind in a lot of people. Instead of having council trying to divine what each ward wants, what each ward thinks, council members at large trying to figure out what the city as a whole wants, with the charter, we can put it to the people and let the people decide. And let the people make their own decision as to what certain policies or procedures or laws they want to have govern them. You can have citizen safeguards. One that's a little bit complicated. I know Member Fisher probably is more versed in this than I am. But you can adjust the tax and debt limitations that the city has. Okay, so what does that mean? The city of Canton, just like any other statutory city, cannot, by law, have a tax levy in excess of 10 mils. So let's put that into context. Our park levy that's going to be on the ballot this November is 4 mils. If we want to do something more substantial, have the citizens weigh in on that, it cannot be something greater than 10 mils. However, there's exceptions, statutory exceptions, for charters. If the need arises, charter governments can exempt themselves from that statutory handcuff. So we think about what that would look like. Say we want to change as a council and as a city how we fund our police departments. And instead of having a completely income tax base, we want to shift it to a property tax base. That levy cannot be over 10 mils. And it certainly would have to be. And it can't be over 10 mils as it's defined now unless we have a charter that specifically exempts it, which is authorized by state law in the Ohio Constitution. Statutory cities cannot. You could go the other direction with tax and debt. We can rein in debt. We can bring in the limitation on levies and taxes to 5 mils. The point is that this is the type of flexibility that you can have with a charter that you do not have with a statutory form of government. You can do more outside-the-box things with a charter, and other cities do. We don't have campaign contribution limits in the city of Canton for the mayor's race and for city council. By charter, some cities have placed those in the city's laws. Cincinnati, for example, they don't like the rich people completely controlling the city. They had years of corruption back in the 30s. And so they enacted statutory or charter-based contribution limits that apply to their candidacies. I'm certainly not advocating for any of these potential positions, but this is an example of the type of flexibility and local control that you can get with a charter. Even something as simple as streamlining council meetings. I think probably almost everybody here has because I recognize almost all of your faces have been to a council. And you hear a lot of the times all of the archaic, suspending this rule, suspending that rule. Council meetings, just the actual doing the city's business, can be much simpler, much more streamlined, where we actually focus on what your concerns are instead of focusing on complying with archaic and rigid statutes. So what are, I mean, this sounds fantastic, right? What are some of the issues that are holding us back? And some of these very legitimate concerns. And I'm going to talk about a few of those. What's holding us back? The Charter Commission. The way a charter is written and formed is by a 15-person panel of individuals, people in this room, who write the charter. They're elected by the city at large, not from any particular area. It's nonpartisan. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, whatever. And you do it without pay. These are the community persons that are elected to draft the charter. And this is not anything that we can ever change. This is something that's ingrained in the Ohio Constitution. So when we look at all of these 75% of the cities in the state of Ohio that have done this, every one of them went through this process. Many people fear that with a charter, we're going to see some of those sweeping drastic changes that I talked about a few slides ago. And in my belief, and I think the objective evidence shows, that's not the case. At least it's not going to be something that happens in Canada. And if we look at 1962, the evidence really bears this out. In 1962, this was the last time, 50 years ago, that the voters were asked whether to form a charter commission. Voters said, sure, sounds great. Somebody like Edmond talked to them and they were all persuaded. But what they came back with, let's keep in mind, they write the charter. They come back with something that they control. And they came back with a charter that reduced the size of the city council, got rid of the ward council seats. I'm a ward councilman. Chairman West is a ward councilman, so is Chairman Fisher. And as a result of those drastic changes, the effort was defeated 71% to 29%. And so what lesson can we draw? In my mind, it's that Canton doesn't want dramatic change to its city government. Canton thinks our government functions well, functions efficiently and effectively, and they want to make it better, not different. And I think that's right. There's been concerns that with this charter commission that are elected all over the city, that it's going to lead to unequal treatment. That a certain section of the city is going to be treated differently than another section. A certain race is going to be treated differently than another. And I don't think that's borne out in the facts. First, there's no evidence of any of the 71% of the cities in Ohio that adopt the charter that anyone was treated any differently. Certainly not with illegal discrimination or socioeconomic discrimination. And it's even difficult to conceive, if you think about it, how could a charter legally do something like that? Certain who make under a certain threshold of money are allowed to vote? Or certain people who live in a different neighborhood, it's statutorily mandated or in the charter that no money can be spent there? I don't think the facts are there or the evidence, and this has been the procedure for about 100 years in the state of Ohio, to suggest that charter government would do that. And if we actually look at an example in the city of Columbus, the demographics of Columbus are 61% white, almost 40% are of the minority. Yet a majority of the council members in Columbus are in fact of the minority. And I don't think it proves that charter necessarily equals good government, because certainly this is good, and I think everyone in this room would agree with this. But I think what it does prove is that charter government in and of itself will not lead to unequal treatment in the city of Canton. There's geographical concerns, certainly well-founded, and I'm not discounting anything, that people who live in the northern part of the city are going to have their way with the South. It's difficult to me to even think about how a defined government could accomplish that. But I think the broader point is, with this citywide charter commission that we elect from, which is where the fear comes from, we already do that. We already elect our people citywide. We elect our mayor citywide. We elect our council members citywide. It's something that's already ingrained in the fabric of our city. And I don't think a charter government is going to change that balance that we have. If we look at Cleveland, for example, we all want to be represented in our areas. It's important. It was important to the voters in 1961 when they rejected the charter, they got rid of wards. Cleveland's a charter city. And I think you can tell, just by the map of Cleveland here, they've certainly not gotten rid of their ward representation. 19 wards in the city. North, south, east, west. And the broader point is that charter in and of itself isn't going to lead to unequal treatment of anyone. One issue that's very important to me, and I know that's important to a lot of people in here, is what charter government, the effect that it may have on our trade. And this is something because unions are very active and very important to the city of Canton. Not only do they live in our communities, but they contribute economically to what we do. And an important part of that is the prevailing wage. If you don't know what prevailing wage law is, it's very important. It's essentially this. For over 85 years, it's been the laws in this state that if you're going to have a public project and use city funds for that public project, you must pay the prevailing wage in that area. Why is that? There's a couple reasons. It gives us better construction. It makes sure that the people who are working these jobs get fair wages, but most importantly, it actually stabilizes the construction industry. It keeps out-of-town firms from cutting the costs in and ruining the livelihood of the citizens who live here. And there's been concern, and I think well-placed concern, that charter government's going to affect prevailing wage laws. And that's not the case. And it's because for over 85 years, prevailing wage has been our state's law, which is city's law, cannot trump. And we actually have the fortune of having the Supreme Court ruling on this issue directly. And they've said, you cannot exempt a charter from the prevailing wage requirements. So I don't think that a charter is going to implicate prevailing wage one way or another. There's another very important tool, contract, that we as a government utilize with our trade unions locally. Some of you may not be familiar with this concept, but it's called a PLA. It's a project labor agreement. These are actually contracts that are authorized by the federal government for the city. Instead of contracting with all these different contractors and allowing the contractors to then contract with the unions, it brings everybody to the table. It allows the cities, it allows the unions, it allows the contractors to have one agreement where everything's laid out. People know who's doing what where, the timelines are streamlined, and a lot of the times there's provisions in there that guarantee there won't be strikes or work stoppages. This is an important tool that the city of Canton uses all the time. We certainly can't afford to lose this tool. And I don't think charter government is going to affect it one way or another. And the reason is because these are individual contracts that a municipality enters into with the contractors, with the trade unions. Whether you're a charter government or a statutory city doesn't matter with these particular contracts. And I think if we look at some examples of cities that utilize project labor agreements on a consistent basis, you see Toledo, which is a charter city. You see Cleveland, which is a charter city. These are all municipalities that, like Canton, value our relationships with our trade unions and utilize this important tool. I don't think charter government is going to affect it one way or another. There's always a concern with any form of democracy that someone's going to come up with a crazy idea. And if they're going to put it to a vote, and it's going to be ingrained in our law, And it's going to be something that we have to live with. And a lot of us on council, as we're mulling through this issue and we're thinking about it, there's been a charter push in Cincinnati that could hurt not private unions, but the public unions, our street workers, cops, our firemen. And I bring up that crazy, in my view, it's a crazy example, at least on a policy perspective, because I don't think that's going to be something that happens again. It's going to jeopardize their retirement. And if we look at just what's going on in Cincinnati, what am I talking about? They want to take the public employees' retirement, move it from a pension to a 401k. They want to amend the charter to do that. Hurt the retirees, not only the ones that have already retired, but those coming on board. Why am I confident that that's not going to happen again? Well, first, it's a surprisingly low number of signatures to have one of these amendments in Cincinnati, about 7,400. If you think about that in terms of the population in Canton versus the population of Cincinnati, that kind of makes sense. Again, the charter is what defines that. But I think more to the point, in Cincinnati, those workers are covered by their own city pension. In Canton, and in other governments, we have state pensions. You can't hurt our pensions, you can't do anything to our pensions by a charter. So again, to crystallize the point, I don't see charter government as something that jeopardizes our retirees in any way. And I think that if you, again, look to the cities that have good relationships with their unions, both public and private, you could look at cities like Cleveland, cities like Toledo. They're of the 73% that have already done this. And I don't think anyone here, and maybe some of you disagree with me, but I think they're doing okay as far as their relationship with their trade unions and keeping a strong middle class. At the end of the day, when we think about what a charter would look like, in my view, what the city of Canton and what the voters of Canton would approve would be a charter government that is very similar, if not identical, to what we already have. To take those state statutes, put them into our charter, and allow us to make efficient, gradual changes over time. Changes more about the ones that I mentioned previously, strengthening the democratic process, bringing the voters into what we do in this city hall, as opposed to a complete rewrite. And there's evidence to back up my suspicion, or my belief, or what I think fairly confidently is going to happen. That evidence is actually the city of Newark, Ohio, one of the most recent cities to adopt a charter in 1992. And this is the final charter that they adopted. In this charter, what they indicated, or 1996 rather, you elected the Newark Charter Commission for the specific purpose of developing a charter which improves the city government. So what did they do? Adopting a charter which reflects the values of Newark does not mean drastic change. In fact, many will find comfort in the fact that much will remain the same under the charter. For instance, the mayor-council plan of government, just like Canton, is still there. The elected offices of city auditor, city treasurer, city law director are still there. And the current council structure with ward representation is still there. This is exactly what Canton should do. This will lead to efficient and effective government. There were changes. Certainly not drastic changes. They changed the council terms from 2 years to 4 years, which under Councilman West's leadership, that's going to be something you have to consider this November. They created a separate Department of Economic Development. They set standards for open public meetings and access, standardized that process. And then they created a charter review commission to make sure the charter meets the needs of the citizens. In the words of the Charter Commission of Newark, which was passed by a good margin in the city, we believe that the charter improves the operation of the Newark government without making drastic changes. Under the charter, Newark's government will focus on your needs and your values. Most importantly, however, the charter will allow you, as citizens of Newark, to make changes to keep pace with the changing world. This is what Canton means. So what are then the next steps? How does this work mechanically if the city of Canton was going to embark on this journey? Well, first we have a degree of due diligence, as with any serious undertaking. Under Chairman West's leadership, as I understand it, will be authorizing the law department to begin work on potential charter legislation. And this is going to take the law department time. This hasn't been done in over 50 years. There's research that needs to be done. There's proposed ballot language that needs to be evaluated. And even something as simple as, how many signatures do you need in order to put your name on the ballot to be on the commission? That's a lot of work for our law department to do. But after this meeting, this will give our law department a chance to begin doing this research. Certainly, continued community dialogue. I think, and Chairman West has indicated this before, that this meeting will hopefully lead to many others, if not personal phone calls. Every one of us on the Judiciary Committee make ourselves available, and we'd be happy to talk about this with you. Ultimately, there could be a vote in these chambers on this issue. And what City Council will be voting on will be whether to allow you, as the City of Canton, to form this charter commission. Because Canton doesn't make the choice. The City Council doesn't make the choice as to whether a charter commission should be formed. You do. And we have to have that vote if we're going to make the May primary, or try to be on the May primary. Certainly it could be later, but if we were to try to make the May primary, the vote has to take place between January 6th and March 6th. And ultimately, you would have your say. If 8 council members vote to allow you to consider this issue, you can decide whether a charter commission is formed. And so I'll conclude here. I think charters are a no-brainer. I really do. Statutory planned cities would be better off if they adopted a charter, even if they don't change any part of their governmental structure. Those aren't my words. That's Chief Counsel for the Ohio Legislature. Cities that have not adopted a charter are missing out on the ability to have local autonomy. I don't think, based on the evidence, the objective evidence, the City of Canton would ever approve a radically dramatic charter. And I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that people of Canton would be discriminatory to anyone in any way. I think if you care about good government, you care about efficient government, and you want to have control over what your government looks like, then you should care about charter. Thank you very much.